Well, son of a bitch. Would you look at that? December 10th has come and gone, and I am still here. Pretty much as I expected to be. But since I am still here, I thought I would share with you an idea that I had, about a year and a half ago now. And this is an idea that relates to artificial intelligence, the development of machine learning algorithms, and the grave possibilities of mass technological unemployment that these developments are said to portend going into the future, and the socioeconomic problems that would be expected to result from such things. Now, the idea that I'm going to discuss is one that, when I thought of it, honestly seemed completely obvious to me. It seemed so clear and obvious to me that it didn't seem worthwhile to even sit down and make a video discussing it, because it seemed to me to be something that anyone could think of on their own if they simply sat down and gave the matter a few minutes of serious thought. However, to my genuine surprise, as I have looked around the discussions in this area, I have not been able to find anyone who has proposed anything quite like what I am about to propose here. And again, that's genuinely surprising to me. I mean, you know that if something drags me out and makes me sit down and make a video, it's like, goddamn. But yeah, I'm genuinely surprised that no one has thought of this. However, I think it's an interesting way to at least deal with these potential problems. So, the line of thought to which I'm responding essentially runs like this. Unlike previous periods in history where there have been fears of mass technological unemployment, we have now reached a time where machines will acquire the capability to do essentially anything that humans can do, and to do it far better and far more efficiently than humans can manage to do it, with unwavering focus and perfect accuracy and so forth. Where previously machines would be able to easily outcompete humans in physical labor, thus resulting in massive gains in productivity, but also massive layoffs of human workers whose labor was no longer required. Um, in this case, because even though workers at previous times could simply shift their labor into other industries, it is alleged that this time, because of artificial intelligence, that will no longer be possible. Because not only will machines be able to perform physical work, they'll also be able to perform intellectual work. I mean, after all, there's no reason why you couldn't program a machine to be able to program other machines, and so even highly skilled technical work like computer programming could essentially be just handed off to machines to do. So it is said, because of this threat, the possibility exists that potentially every human person currently working, or nearly every human person, will be unemployed by machines, will not be able to compete with the enormous productivity that these machines can offer to companies. And so you'll have this enormous army of the unemployed who are not earning wages, who are not being paid, who are not able to secure food, shelter, or sustenance for themselves. And this is going to cause an enormous amount of social chaos. I mean, you can expect in the face of something like this, for instance, that people might riot, they might fall into despair, any number of terrible things might happen. So this is essentially the line of thought to which I'm responding. Now, it is proposed that in order to avert this disaster, it is necessary for the government to give out a universal basic income to all humans. Essentially, since they will sooner or later be displaced by a machine, it is necessary that they have at least a certain minimum of income, and that they're able to use this to secure a living for themselves. Also, since enormous gains in productivity will result from the increased use of artificial intelligence in industry, it will be very easy to tax away the money from these enormously wealthy companies to supply this UBI, and so the idea goes, it'll basically work out. It'll be a workable and sustainable system, and in fact will be the only such system under this scenario, because humans just won't be employed anymore, or at least not widely. Now, what I'm about to propose, what I'm about to discuss, will show that essentially everything about this UBI proposal is completely unnecessary. It does not need to be done, and not only does it not need to be done, but I will make this as easy and as advantageous as possible for those who believe in this kind of coming mass technological unemployment. I will, for the sake of argument, assume that everything they say about the potential capabilities of AI going into the future is true. I will assume, for the sake of argument, that there is no labor which a human can perform, which a machine cannot also perform, but far better. And therefore that every human will be thrown out of work at some point by a machine. I will make this assumption. Now, at the outset, let me clearly state that I don't believe that anything like this is realistic for even a second. However, for me to explain why would require me to make a long digression. It would require me to discuss artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms in great detail and explain why there are certain human abilities that machines as programmed today, even under the advanced machine learning algorithms that we have, will just never be able to do those things. However, I'm not going to discuss that. I just want to make it clear from the outset that the scenario in which I will be positing the thought experiment that I'm about to describe is not one that I actually consider to be realistic. However, for the sake of argument, I will assume it to be the case. I will assume it to be the case that machines will be eventually developed that are so advanced that there is no human labor which they will not be able to decisively and completely displace. And what I want to show is that even under this extreme catastrophic scenario, you still don't need a UBI. There is still a way to prevent the kind of social chaos that UBI proponents fear without devising any sort of government-administered welfare scheme. Okay, so before I get into a discussion of that in detail, before I describe the kind of thought experiment that I want to talk about, there are a few things that I'm going to lay down just as kind of prefatory remarks. First, in the thought experiment, when I get into detail about it, there are going to be a number of parameters in it, and they are more or less arbitrary parameters. Now, I'm going to start out by just granting arbitrary values to all the things that I'm going to mention, and then as I proceed and as I develop the thought experiment, I'm going to tweak those values and describe what happens when you tweak them. And that'll be important going forward. Also, there is another thing. There's another issue to discuss, which I also cannot give a full discussion to because it would just derail the video and make it impossibly long. And that is the question of whether it is possible for machines ever to achieve consciousness and self-awareness. This is an important and thorny issue, but like I said, I'm not going to be able to discuss it. Now, there's going to be one area where this topic will actually be of importance to the thought experiment that I'm going to describe, and when that time comes, I'll mention it, and I'll very briefly discuss it. But what I'm going to do as I go into the discussion is make clear to you that whether you believe it to be possible or impossible for machines to ever achieve consciousness will not make a difference to the kind of system that I'm proposing. It won't make a significant difference to it. What I'm describing will work no matter what you believe on that particular issue. So, now with that laid down, the first thing I want to talk about is a recent feature of the new blockchain economy known as the ICO. ICO stands for Initial Coin Offering. Essentially, the ICO is, or has been in the last few years, especially with the development of the Ethereum platform, has been a way for tech companies with very strange, very interesting, very potentially disruptive and counterintuitive ideas to find a way to gather capital and finance their ventures without having to go through all of the trouble of issuing a formal IPO. Because of regulations that have been passed in the last number of years relating to IPOs, it's actually become increasingly difficult to issue a formal initial public offering where a company offers, publicly traded stock to whomever wishes to buy them on an exchange. So because this has become so difficult, because the regulatory thicket has become so unmanageable, the number of IPOs in the last few years has decreased rather sharply. And these tech companies have found a way to circumvent this via the ICO, or initial coin offering. And this essentially works the same way as an IPO, except that instead of issuing stock to the public, some company will create a cryptocurrency. That cryptocurrency or crypto token will back whatever project it is that they wish to engage in. And they will offer units of that cryptocurrency for sale on the market. It will acquire some value, and as buyers buy it, the initial release or stock of the crypto tokens that were offered by the company will go. The money raised will go to the company, and the money will then be used to finance whatever venture it is that the company has in mind. So, for example, take something like Skycoin. Skycoin wants to finance sky computing. They essentially want to create, many things, but essentially just an entire internet architecture, including the hardware that you need to run the internet, except kind of redesigning it from the bottom up, and essentially circumventing telecom companies and everything else. They also have other things like encryption of data. I won't go into detail, but certain things like that. Certain things like what Skycoin is planning, anything that they want to finance, and there's an endless number of companies that have done this now, since the launch of the Ethereum platform has made this possible. Since the launch of Ethereum, that's basically what an ICO is. Now, since the cryptocurrency issued by these companies in these cases functions in more or less the same way that a stock would function if it were issued by a different sort of company in an IPO, well, there's no reason in principle why a company might not issue a crypto token and then also say that that crypto token will pay a dividend out to whomever happens to be holding it. Say a quarterly dividend, as you would have with a stock. There's no reason why this can't, in principle, be done. So once you realize that this can be done, that you can do something like this, I think it should become fairly obvious what I'm about to propose. But of course, since I'm me, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to describe everything in detail, because if I'm not making an hour and a half long video, I don't want to do this, man, So essentially, yes, you could have a situation. Let's say you have a situation where incredibly efficient and intelligent machines are developed, and they are so powerful, they function so well, that they are able to be, on average, let's say, 1,000 times more productive than human workers across essentially every industry, on average. Well, obviously, there would be no point in employing human workers anymore under that situation. You'd simply throw them all out of work, replace them with machines, increase your productivity 1,000 times, and then the owners of said company would become enormously wealthy. Now, such a company could, prior to the explosion in productivity resulting from this AI, issue an ICO, create their own crypto token, and issue it to the public. And that crypto token could be dividend bearing. Now, if you're a worker for the company and you fear the prospect of future unemployment, you could buy some of these tokens and earn a dividend and essentially live off of that. Now, here is where I'm going to start playing a bit with the arbitrary parameters. One of them I've already mentioned, which is that machines will be 1,000 times more productive than human workers on average. Now, again, it really doesn't matter too much for the purposes of my thought experiment here what you assume the relative productivity is of machines to humans. However, that relative productivity must be high. The productivity of machines relative to humans must be some kind of a high multiple of human productivity. It can't be something low. In order for the mass unemployment scenario to happen that I'm assuming, it can't simply be the case that machines are only 10% more productive than humans on average, or only 20% more productive. I think there has to be some kind of massive disparity, some kind of large multiple. If not 1,000 times, perhaps 500 times, perhaps 100 times, perhaps 50 times. It doesn't make much difference at all, as I'll show as I flesh this out, what exactly you assume about the relative productivity of machines to humans, provided that it's some sort of high multiple. And I think that the restriction that it be a high multiple is a reasonable one, because you will, in fact, need something like that to be the case if the total unemployment of humans as a result of artificial intelligence is to become a reality. So I think that's a reasonable assumption. But you can play with that parameter provided the multiple is high. Okay. Another parameter to play with is the actual dividend itself. Now, the average dividend on a dividend-bearing stock is something like 3 or 4%. There are, of course, stocks that offer higher dividends. I've seen stocks that offer 12% dividends. Maybe there are some that are even higher, but that's about the average. Now, I don't think it's wise in this situation to apply the average dividend for a stock to a crypto token dividend, because in a case where all the human workers at a company have been fired, and no longer need to be paid a wage, that company's costs will be enormously lower, unimaginably lower than they were previously. And this is going to be one of the many things that will enable them to achieve the tremendous productivity and efficiency that they'll be able to achieve in this situation. So, now, I'm not exactly sure what the precise statistics are on this. I tried to look for it, and I had some difficulty finding it. Although I assume, obviously, that it varies from industry to industry, and that the numbers will be higher for more labor-intensive industries and lower for less labor-intensive industries. But it seems to be the case that for most businesses, on average, payroll constitutes about 30% of revenue. Okay, so on average, a business will spend about 30% of its total revenue paying out its workers. And this includes not only wages, but also other forms of compensation, fringe benefits like health insurance and that sort of thing. So in a situation where all workers are thrown out of work by machines, I don't think it's at all unreasonable to expect the crypto tokens that companies that do this issue to offer dividends in the neighborhood of 30%. Not the 3 or 4% dividends that we see on a typical stock, but much, much higher ones. In fact, dividends that would be roughly equivalent to the percentage of their revenue that would previously have been spent on payroll. Now, why do I say this? Isn't it possible, some naysayers might say, for the owners of the company to simply hoard all of the money for themselves? Why offer such high dividends? Why offer dividends at all, for that matter? Well, they would offer them because it would be in their interest to offer them, is the short answer. Now, in order for the owners of the companies that are using these machines to produce products to become wealthy, the products that they produce must be sold on a market. There's no other way for them to earn a revenue. And in order for those products to be sold, there must be potential consumers who are able to purchase the product. And for them to be able to purchase the product, they must have something with which to purchase that product. And if workers are unemployed en masse and not earning a wage, well then that mode of earning an income will not be available to them, and they must have something else, some other means by which to purchase whatever it is that the capitalist produces for them and offers them. So if the capitalists, if the owners of these firms choose not to offer dividends at all, or to offer low dividends, they won't be able to earn an income. They won't be able to sell their products at market. Because remember, I'm assuming the most extreme scenario here. Everyone is unemployed. Everyone has been thrown out of work by machines that can do any sort of work far better than humans can do them. So clearly under this scenario, it would be in the interest of the capitalist to offer a dividend. Now, you might say, all right, fair enough, perhaps they'll offer a dividend, but then why isn't the old 3 to 4% statistic that currently holds as an average for stock dividends the applicable statistic? Why should it be 30% or perhaps higher? Well, because if you offer a low dividend, some other company can come along, issue an ICO, and then offer a higher dividend. You can simply say to potential investors, potential buyers of the crypto token that you're issuing, that you offer the highest dividend currently available in the market. And there might be competition between companies to offer higher dividends. And then the dividend will settle on some market rate. Now, I won't venture to predict precisely what that will be. However, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect it to be something that is roughly equivalent to the proportion of revenue that is spent by companies on payroll, on paying their workers. And that's, like I said, that's about 30%. In fact, it's probably reasonable to assume that the dividends will be even higher, because machines will not only be able to do, ordinary sort of manual work, they'll also be able to do intellectual work. Remember, they'll be able to program other machines, so you won't need programmers anymore, and those tend to be paid quite a bit. They'll also be able to repair other machines, and so the depreciation costs that capitalists have to deal with will also be decreased, because it will be far easier for them to replenish, diminished capital. If machines break down, other machines can very quickly and at very low cost and at very high efficiency repair the machines that have broken down. And so costs for the capitalist will fall in all ways. It's not just that they won't have to pay laborers anymore. Their other costs will fall. And so it's reasonable to expect these dividend payouts to be even higher than the percentage that is currently spent by companies on payroll. It wouldn't surprise me if the dividend ultimately turned out to be something like 40, perhaps even 50, or even 60%. I don't think that's unreasonable. I think that if you actually had a scenario where machines were hundreds or perhaps even thousands of times more productive on average than human workers, and if all human workers were unemployed and costs commensurately fell, you could easily see something like that. I don't think that's unrealistic. And I hope I've sufficiently justified why I think so. So yeah, I mean, I realize that this is something that you could argue with, and I'm not going to throw down a precise figure on the dividend, but 40 to 60% is, I think, totally within a reasonable range. Now, having established that, imagine if, in anticipation of the explosion of artificial intelligence, some company does an ICO. They issue a crypto token. They say to potential investors that they will offer a certain dividend. That dividend will make the token more attractive to buyers. And they will also say that they're issuing it in part because they anticipate in the coming years that there will be massive layoffs as a result of machines displacing human workers. Okay, so let's say that you're able to buy one of these crypto tokens before the explosion in productivity resulting from artificial intelligence. Let's say that you buy $100 worth of Company A's crypto token. Okay, the requisite time goes by. Artificial intelligence indeed enables companies to replace all of their human workers with machines. And those machines are, let's say, 1,000 times more productive than their previous human labor force. Now that means, on average, because on a market, stock prices and the price of the crypto token will essentially function as a stock price for this company. It will function in more or less the same way. In the long run, there is a tendency for stock prices to reflect the true value, the true kind of market productivity of the company. So we can assume, and I say this fully aware that it will not be exactly this way. There will be some rough edges. Not everything will be this smooth. I understand that. However, we can say basically that because the company is now 1,000 times more productive, is able to crank out 1,000 times more products, it is 1,000 times more valuable, and that increase in value will be reflected in the value of the crypto token, at least in real terms. Not necessarily in nominal terms, but in real terms. So if you buy $100 worth of that crypto token before the artificial intelligence productivity explosion, then after it, you will own the equivalent of $100,000 worth of capital. Now, if that crypto token gives you, let's say, a 40% dividend annually, well, then you earn the equivalent of $40,000 a year. And you do this despite not having any sort of traditional job. Now, $40,000 a year is certainly not enough to be able to afford you a lavish lifestyle, but you can survive on it. You can get by. And remember, this was achieved with only an investment of $100. Now, even a poor family can scrape together $100, surely. $100 is not difficult to come up with. I mean, even for someone who's poor, if you anticipate mass layoffs as a result of artificial intelligence, and your family is poor and it's very difficult for you to get money together, it would seem to me for it to be worthwhile under those circumstances, even to go, into debt to be able to finance the purchase of these crypto tokens. Because remember, once artificial intelligence takes over in this thought experiment, your crypto tokens will become an enormously important asset. In fact, I could probably see going forward, if we continue with the thought experiment, if we continue with the scenario, I can see these hordes, these masses, these collections of crypto tokens owned by each person. I can see them becoming, sort of like family inheritances, important assets that are passed down from generation to generation, since they are essentially the only means to earn an income and to survive in a world in which machines can do everything better than humans can do them. So again, we're under the parameters that I proposed here, you'd only need $100 investment to be able to make about $40,000 a year. Now, okay, we can tweak the parameters a bit. And this is going to be the part where I tweak the parameters. Let's say it's not quite as extreme as a 1,000-fold increase in productivity. Let's say that machines don't make companies 1,000 times more productive. Let's say they only make them 50 times more productive. Well, if we assume a 40% dividend again, you won't need a $100 investment. You'll need a $2,000 investment. Now, for a poor or working class family, that will certainly be more difficult to come up with. But again, given the extreme importance of having access to something like this going forward, it would be worthwhile even to go into debt for something like this. I mean, let's say that you're a working class family, you're a working class guy, you got some factory job that you have with which to support your family, and you realize that there is this prospect looming out ahead of technological unemployment, but your company, or perhaps even some other company, issues an ICO, and you decide, look, I really need this going forward because I'm not going to have, a job in 10 years or in 20 years or whatever it is, and I won't be able to feed myself or my kids or whatever else, just his family. So now, if you're not able to come up with $2,000 immediately, given the enormous value that an asset like that would have in the future, it would totally be worthwhile, I think, even to just go into debt for something like this. Hell, I mean, put it on your credit card even. I mean, let's do the math here. $2,000 of credit card debt, if you have even just like an okay credit score, like a decent credit score, and you're able to secure, let's say, a 21% interest rate on a credit card. $2,000 of debt at 21% interest, that's what, $420. That comes out to about what, 34, 35 bucks a month, plus whatever amount would have to be added onto that to pay down the principal at a minimum level. So if you make minimum payments on the thing, on the debt, you'd end up paying $60, maybe $70 a month. That's annoying. You're going to have that hanging over you for a couple of years, but it's manageable. I think even a working class guy can come up with 70 bucks a month. Now, the reason I'm bothering to go through all of this is just to show you in detail that the sort of thing that I'm describing is not out of the reach of people of modest economic means. You don't have to be some sort of uber rich capitalist to take advantage of this possibility of these companies and their ICOs that I've been talking about. Even someone of modest economic means who doesn't have much can, with a relatively small investment that it would totally be within his means to make, manage, once the productivity explosion happens, to secure an income for himself and for his family. So I mean that's basically the idea that I wanted to communicate. Now again, as I said, you can play with the parameters. You can alter, for example, the dividend payout. You can say, well, maybe it won't be 40%, maybe it'll be 30%. Okay, I mean we can argue about that, but I think something in the neighborhood of about 40 or 50% is totally reasonable, and it might be even higher. Just given as I said, the decrease in costs that companies will be able to enjoy as a result of AI, and also given what average payroll expenses have been historically. I don't think that's unreasonable. You can play with the parameter for a bit, but there's a definitely restricted range of what's reasonable. Similarly, you can play with the parameters for the total amount of machine productivity relative to humans, but again, for the mass total kind of unemployment scenario to result, it would have to be something quite high. The multiple of productivity of machines relative to humans would have to be quite high. Perhaps it's not 1,000, perhaps it's only 100, perhaps it's 50, whatever. But any reasonable number would have to be quite high. So we can argue about these things and we can play with them, but the ranges to which they're restricted, given the assumption I'm making that humans will be totally thrown out of the labor force, will be such that you'll still be able, if you anticipate this change and position yourself and buy crypto tokens, dividend-bearing crypto tokens, to secure an income for yourself despite having been thrown out of work. Now, another thing too, though, is that it also makes a difference how you set the parameters in one other way. The lower the level of productivity of machines relative to humans, the fewer humans will be thrown out of work. So if you assume that machines will be 1,000 times more productive, you can reasonably say, look, every person's going to be thrown out. There's no way that they can compete. But if you insist on a lower number, let's say 10, 20, perhaps even 50, you might have some residual amount of humans that are still employed doing various tasks. They might be marginal, but they'll exist, and insofar as they do exist, the social problem of attempting to find some way for these unemployed people to earn a living will be, correspondingly less serious. So that's essentially it. That's essentially kind of the thought experiment that I wanted to propose. And what's very interesting about it is that it essentially turns Karl Marx's prediction about the end of capitalism on its head. Because not only will it not be the case if this comes to fruition, and I don't believe that it precisely will, but again, we're assuming this for the sake of argument. If this comes to fruition, not only will it not be the case that the class of proletarians will displace and eliminate the capitalist class, and that essentially everyone will become a kind of proletarian then. But in fact, the exact opposite will happen. The proletariat will be eliminated, and everyone who was formerly a proletarian will become a kind of capitalist. They will live off of a dividend payout. Um, so now, having proposed this, before sitting down to make this video, I sat around thinking up a few objections to this proposal. And I have to be honest, I've not been able to think of many serious ones. There are quite a few non-serious objections that you could throw at this. And by non-serious objections, I just mean any objections that you might come up with that you would not come up with if you understood standard economic theory correctly. So one example of a non-serious objection would be something like what I discussed earlier, which is, well, why would the capitalists who own these companies offer dividend-bearing crypto tokens in the first place? Well, because, as I described, it's to their advantage to do so. There's no way for them to earn an income, for them to make money. In fact, their own crypto tokens will have no value if they're not issued into a market and cannot be used to purchase goods. The value of those tokens will be zero. So there'll be no sense in owning those tokens. And even if capitalists own machines and equipment that they use to produce goods, if no one is buying the goods, there's really no value in the equipment. Now, there might be certain capitalists that might get greedy, hypothetically, and they might choose not to offer dividends, or they might choose, simply to hoard all the productivity and the income that accrues from their enormously productive and valuable machines. But again, number one, they will be outcompeted by those capitalists who do offer dividend-bearing crypto tokens. And also, since those hoarding capitalists do not sell to a market, their capital value will decrease, because a significant factor in determining capital value is that capital's productivity, is its ability to create for a market. And if that's not being done, that capitalist's capital value will plunge. He will swiftly become poorer, and eventually someone will buy him out who will not be quite as short-sighted as he. So objections of this type are just what I take to be non-serious objections. Again, they're objections that you wouldn't make if you understood economic theory. Another example of a kind of really not serious objection is the objection that, well, all right, I suppose you're correct that this would in fact be an effective way to sort of insulate workers from the dread economic consequences of mass unemployment. Even if everybody's thrown out of work, if they have a stock, a collection of crypto tokens that they own, they can live off of their dividends, and I suppose that would work. But it would only be effective if the workers who are under threat of being thrown out of work by artificially intelligent machines are able to successfully anticipate the change and are able to position themselves ahead of time. They're able to buy into crypto tokens before the explosion in productivity that will happen truly happens. And it's only by correctly anticipating this that they'll be able to properly position themselves. And what happens if they don't successfully anticipate this? Well, I don't see any reason to think that they wouldn't. It's not as if people are not aware of this problem. And it's also not as if companies themselves won't bring it to the attention of their workforce when the threat is imminent. So you'd have to expect a kind of unreasonable level of collusion and sort of conspiratorial meddling among corporate CEOs, that they're just going to keep this thing a secret from their workforce, this thing that everyone has already been talking about on the internet for years and that many people know about and are worried about. Somehow no one's going to see this coming, no one's going to do anything to position themselves. I don't think that's reasonable. Now, it might be that some people might come in earlier than others, and those who really come in on this very early and are able to make decent-sized investments might become wealthy beyond the dreams of avarice if they do so. I certainly expect something like that would happen under those circumstances. There certainly wouldn't be anything like income equality. There would be massively, enormously, tremendously, unbelievably wealthy people resulting from this. However, as I discussed earlier, to secure at least a modest income, to secure something that you could live off of, really does not require a large investment if you have enough foresight. It's something that would be well within the reach of even working class people. So I don't see why you would expect them to fail to anticipate the comings of these things. I think they certainly would. I mean, people are talking about this kind of thing, about the possibility of AI and mass technological unemployment. It's out there. It's in the ether. It's part of the zeitgeist. People know about it. All right. So another objection might be, well, wait a minute. Didn't you say originally that you mean this proposal to be an alternative system to a government guaranteed UBI, and that didn't you say that you think that what you're proposing is superior to a UBI, but in fact this actually quite sounds like a UBI. It's just that instead of the government administering it, it's companies administering it in the form of dividend payouts on crypto tokens. Well, in some kind of superficial ways, it's similar, but in a very important way, it's different. Because the system that I've proposed is not administered by the government, it's not possible to create voting blocks and interest groups and simply vote yourself more money. So, for example, under a government-guaranteed UBI, it might start out rather modest. It might start out as, for example, simply an offering of, let's say, $1,000 a month, like Andrew Yang wants to do. And that will have certain economic consequences. There might be people who earn less than $1,000 a month, or maybe only slightly more than $1,000 a month, who just leave their jobs entirely and might accept earning a slightly smaller income, but might consider this to be worthwhile given all the free time that they earn from it. Let's say you work a part-time job 30 hours a week, and you make, let's say, $300 a week. So you make $1,200 a month, and you could either continue working 30 hours a week for your $1,200 a month, or you could work 0 hours a week and make $1,000 a month. Now it's $200 less a month, but you're getting 30 extra hours of free time. I can see many people deciding that that's worth it to them, that they would be willing to make such a sacrifice, and that will, in its turn, have economic consequences of its own. And but what I want to get to specifically with regard to that is the point that, again, you can just vote yourself a greater income. You can say, yes, it's very nice, it's wonderful that we're given this $1,000 a month universal basic income here, but that's really not enough to live on. I mean, people need more to have fulfilling lives, and they could easily organize themselves into a voting block. Some demagogic politician can come along and say $2,000 a month, $3,000, and of course people will vote for that person, and it will be done. And there is no way to impose controls on this kind of system and prevent it from spilling out of control and sort of devouring increasingly higher and higher portions of the national income, at least for as long as the political system is run democratically. So, but under this kind of corporate dividend system through ICOs that I've described, you can't do this. You can't just vote yourself more money. There are also administrative problems. Bureaucrats are going to skim a little bit off the top, and it is going to, if you divert income to the government in this way, you are going to crowd out private investment and private spending in various ways, and that's going to have depressive economic consequences. Whereas under the system that I've proposed, that won't happen, because the dividend payouts will be reached through market competition, and then they'll be administered through a kind of market mechanism. And so therefore we'll know that, by demonstrated preference, the outcome being reached is is optimal with respect to the welfare of consumers, or in this case, the dividend earners and the people who buy the products produced by these companies. Which I guess if you really think about that last objection, that also falls under the heading of non-serious objections. And again, I want to be fair to the people who are opposing this proposal, but I really can't think of any good arguments against it. Again, one other has occurred to me, which is that, all right, suppose it's true, suppose you're correct. Even under the worst imaginable, the most catastrophic sort of scenario of mass unemployment resulting from artificial intelligence, even there, let's say you're correct, that it will still nevertheless be possible for ordinary people who've been thrown out of work to earn an income. The way that I've suggested that they can earn an income, however, is essentially through them being a kind of, passive rentier. You just kind of sit there and you collect your dividend payments, and you don't really have to work or exert yourself or do anything interesting. And won't this have adverse moral consequences on people? Won't people become bored? Won't they become listless? Won't they become nihilistic? And all of this. Well, I mean, I'm not sure how many machinists or factory workers are deeply fulfilled by their work. I'm sure that if you go to them and you ask them why they do the work that they do, the vast majority of them will reply that they work where they work and how they work because they must do so in order to support their loved ones. I am quite sure that will be the most popular answer. Very few of them do it because they simply love to do it. Now, with free time, with the kind of, opening of vistas of possibility that result from not having to do traditional work and simply being able to earn your income through dividend payments, you can do, all sorts of other things. Now, it's true. There is a sense in which, as the proportion of things that are under a person's voluntary and free control in life expands, their choices might become unmanageable, and they might become bad choices. I'm sure some of these people will use their income to drink themselves into a stupor. I'm sure bad things will happen, but I don't know that it will necessarily become measurably or markedly worse than these things currently are now. I mean, certainly you can, as I said, as if you live off of these dividend payouts, do other things. Now, this brings me back to the kind of final point that I want to make. Earlier I said that I would delay the question of whether or not it was possible for machines to become conscious. Okay, now I'm going to modify the thought experiment and integrate that complication into it and show that it's not really going to make much of a difference. Okay, suppose first that it's not possible for machines to become conscious. Well, there are all sorts of work for which consciousness is required, and these include mainly sort of any kind of service-related work that requires you to care for people, interact with them socially, and for which that is a kind of crucial component of the job. Non-conscious machines will not be able to do any of this kind of work. They'll not be able to, give that kind of, human contact, human interaction, sociability, sociality, all that stuff that we enjoy and that we want from other humans. If machines are not conscious, they will not be able to provide us with these things. At best, they'll be able to provide us with very cheap and very inadequate simulations of them, and we will want the real thing. We will want humans instead, at least those of us who aren't sort of, mentally aberrant and sort of psychologically bizarre. The vast majority of people, I think, will prefer a human to a machine. I mean, just think of, for example, any kind of call center. You call any sort of large company because you have, there's some issue and you need to contact customer service, and you're talking to a machine. Now, how many people are just like, God damn it, put me on the phone with a person? Now, it might be that the machines that handle this sort of thing might become better, but I am skeptical of this. I think that people would be willing to pay a premium just to contact humans. Or even something like, let's take something like the production of art. Let's say, okay, now you don't have to work. You can live off of your dividend in this artificial intelligence future, and you decide that you want to take up painting or you want to compose music or whatever it is. Right now, there might be machines that also paint and compose music, and they might be able to, put on concerts or sell their art or whatever else. But a human can do this as well, and I strongly suspect that there will be a premium placed by humans on the work generated by other humans, simply because it's been generated by humans. So if you're a human painter and you paint something, you can just say, well, I painted this. This is human made. And there will be novelty value to this. I don't think that's at all unreasonable to expect. You can see collector's value and novelty value emerging in all kinds of items that technologically would have been considered archaic. I mean, there are vast numbers of people, for example, who have begun to collect records, even though that's old technology. Now, there are some that will say that the analog audio production from a record actually sounds smoother and cleaner and is more enjoyable to listen to than music, dispersed and played digitally. I don't want to get into that argument, but the point is just that the record is archaic technology, and nevertheless it has novelty value. People like it. I don't think it's unreasonable to expect something similar to emerge with respect to human productions. This doesn't just have to be music or artwork. It can be anything made by a human, potentially. I think there will be collectors who will simply want things that are made by humans because they're made by humans, which, interestingly enough, will give another source of income to at least some humans. So, as I said, to modify the thought experiment with respect to the question of whether or not machines can ever be conscious, if they cannot be conscious, they will simply do work for which consciousness is not required, and humans will remain in those positions for which consciousness is required. Sort of interpersonal, service-related, sort of care kind of positions. You can have a machine diagnose a human, for example, and you may not need a doctor for that, but unless you have something like a conscious machine that's able to simulate human behavior very well, you're not going to be able to generate, let's say, a doctor's or a nurse's bedside manner. Something like that. So if machines cannot be made conscious, they will simply not be operative in the fields for which that is required, and humans can work there, and those who wish to buy crypto tokens and draw dividend payouts can buy them as they're issued by companies working in the industries where there are machines that have replaced humans. On the other hand, if you can create conscious machines, well then one of two things will happen. Machines might be employed, conscious machines might be employed in certain tasks, and since they're conscious and since they have the full range of what we might call personality, you could then argue that, well, these machines, unlike these other non-conscious machines, may actually need to be remunerated for their work. They may need to be paid so that they can participate in the economy and do certain things and live kind of fulfilling and enjoyable lives. I mean, they will have personalities, and so it makes sense to pay them. So if you have machines like that, you can simply pay them directly as you would pay a wage worker. Or you could have them do just as the humans are doing and buy crypto tokens. And there will probably be some mix of this. And if there is such a mix, that may cause you to alter and to tweak some of the parameters that I've mentioned. But it doesn't fundamentally alter the structure of the thought experiment. The only question is, will the changes and the tweaks to the parameters that have to be made, if you have to also integrate conscious machine workers into the labor force, will those changes be severe enough to upend the entire thought experiment and make it unworkable? Now, I see no reason why that's the case. Really, that's it. That's all I wanted to say. Um, like I said, even under the most catastrophic assumptions, even if you assume that every single person will be unemployed by advancing AI, this need not result in a catastrophic scenario. There would still be ways for people to survive, to earn an income, and you don't need a government administered UBI to achieve that. So that's really it. That's all I wanted to say. And I do think it is interesting that if something like this were to play out, it would essentially generate the reverse of Karl Marx's prophecy about the end of capitalism. Uh, not only will the capitalist class not be eliminated, but if this happens, we'll all become capitalists, and that's rather amusing, isn't it? So yeah, thank you for listening, and that's all I wanted to say.